podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everyone and welcome to part 2 of the Manchester United Weekly Podcast September International Break Patron Mailbag. I'm Harry Robinson and Jack Tate is with me as always. We'll be doing these every international break, 2 episodes shaped by our patrons. If you want to be a part of this next time in October, head to patreon.com/United Weekly Podcast. You can sign up for between £1.50 and £10 a month and get early access to ad-free episodes every week, with a 15 to 20 minute bonus section in every Tuesday morning episode as well. Anyway, let's get stuck in. Today we've got questions on Antony, social media, patience, how Jack and I became United fans, our first memories, first games at Old Trafford, favourite moments, favourite United moments that is, and all-time 11s. We'll also talk Messi, Bellingham, the Glazers, United through time, and the differences between Reds in Manchester, England and across the world. There is loads to talk about. It should be really good fun. Some great questions from our patrons, and let's begin with one from Ethan, who says, not a nice one, but what on earth do we do with Antony? Now, Ethan was asking this before we found out on the day we're recording, which is Sunday. United and Antony both released statements which indicates that Antony won't be involved with training or be available for selection for matches while he deals with these allegations, basically. Jack, what do you make of this? It seems it's another really difficult case to me. Feels like the right action for now from the player and the club. It looks really bad. There are some horrible allegations, but Antony should have the right to prove his innocence. But it's best to do that in the background, not while playing for United. And it allows United to conduct their own investigation. Hopefully they handle that one better than the Greenwood palaver. I guess the bigger concern is, or maybe not the bigger concern in relation to this, but the bigger picture thing is football's approaching a pretty interesting era. It's kind of starting to be affected by... It's starting to be affected on a more regular basis by the far increased scrutiny that social media and 24-hour news brings. It'll be interesting. Does this pattern continue of clubs suspending players while there are allegations to face? Because as things stand, they are already allegations. Antony is currently an innocent man. So it's tricky ground to tread on for United. Yeah,
I think the Mason Greenwood situation changed sort of the precedent a little bit here for cases like this. And that was, I think, partially because the evidence that was presented on social media, or that was available on social media, seemed so damning that it sort of ratcheted up that pressure on United to take some immediate action and suspend Greenwood while the investigation was happening.
They had no choice with that one.
Right. But we've seen plenty of occasions in recent years where players that have had similar accusations at United and in the past have just continued as if nothing sort of happened. And I think the Greenwood thing being so high profile has to some degree sort of maybe shifted the expectation and the precedent on what clubs should do in this sort of interim period where accusations have been made and, you know, investigations, whether official from the police or not, are ongoing. Like, I think if this happened 2 or 3 years ago, I don't think United would really have acknowledged these accusations and probably would have just continued to play Antony as if nothing happened and waited until, you know, the police got involved, which is effectively what happened with Benjamin Mendy at City, for example. Yeah,
I think that's the tricky thing, isn't it? It feels as if United are currently, not deliberately, I don't think, setting the precedent for the rest of the Premier League. And it does feel as if this needs to be a league-wide precedent and agreed structure where if a player is under investigation by the police, they should be suspended from playing, or the opposite.
And it shouldn't be United's job to set that precedent at all.
Exactly.
Which is what you're saying.
Yeah. Because there was I was talking to my dad about this the other day, and he was saying that there was a similar kind of era in British politics where a lot more of these scandals started coming out on a much more regular basis, and they weren't always as extreme wrongdoing as in the case of the alleged wrongdoing of Mason Greenwood or the alleged wrongdoing of Antony. But it came to a point where a set of rules had to be put in place where parliamentarians were suspended if they were under investigation by the police or if they were charged with. There were different sets of rules for it and regulations, and it feels like football is going to need that, because if it carries on in this kind of each club has to decide what to do on a case by case basis, it's going to get very messy, because Antony and Mason Greenwood are not the only players to be alleged to have committed some kind of domestic or sexual abuse or sexual assault. There are many in the Premier League.
When I think another reason why a league-wide rule or mandate on this is so important is because, Manchester United are in a somewhat fortunate position that no one player is integral to the club's future in the sense of survival or really make and break. It might be the difference between, getting into the Champions League. Maybe you might miss out on the trophy.
I think what you said to give... Are you going to kind of give the example of, say, Jack Grealish at Aston Villa like 5 years ago? The club was very dependent on one player. What do they do in that scenario?
Yeah, and more, not just if you're so dependent on one player, but, what if you're in the relegation zone, something happens, 6-7 games to go in the season?
Yeah.
Clubs are going to be forced to make choices that, potentially could be make or break for the survival of the club, or it certainly, really make or break for the next few years. And I think we have enough evidence just from the world that people in those cases don't often take sort of the moral high ground, as it were.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just even more important to have some league mandate on how to continue in these types of situations.
The difficulty is that the Premier League was effectively founded and remains a group of clubs negotiating big broadcast deals.
Yeah.
What it wasn't founded to be and what it hasn't turned into is a genuine institution with it's going in that direction, but it's not at that level yet. The body that's responsible for that is the Football Association in England. But the FA have struggles in telling Premier League clubs what to do because there's a massive power imbalance there, because the Premier League is more powerful than the FA. So that's why, so not just this case, but for example, Super League and fan regulation and so much is about that imbalance in power between the FA and the Premier League, and imbalance in responsibilities. And that's why an independent regulator was recommended. So we'll see how this develops. It's really interesting. Ethan, thank you for the question.
Just to add one more thing on that point, if you compare it to a lot of American sports, for example, where the league itself, whether the NFL, NBA, MLB, whatever, have a lot of power and a lot of ability to make these types of decisions. In the NFL, it's a pretty common occurrence for the league to suspend players based on either transgressions outside of the sport, whether it's domestic violence or substance abuse. Plenty of players currently suspended for taking performance-enhancing substances. And as part of that, there's also a players' association that's effectively a union of the players that negotiate, a lot of collective bargaining agreements basically every 10 years or so. It's just a completely different model. I don't actually, I'm not sitting here and saying that either one is really better than the other, but there are other sort of models of how to run a big sports league out there. And it is strange in some ways, the way that the Premier League is run, that you're right, the body really that has that kind of decision-making power is not the same body that has any of the financial power. And it or not as much of the financial power.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really interesting. And there's further imbalances in PFA is probably at its least powerful for a couple of decades after years of abuse of power from the CEO Gordon Taylor, and now failures at so many levels. Something that I've written about for United We Stand and plan to investigate a bit more. Nobby Styles' son John, who was a player himself, is campaigning massively for, because the PFA's treatment of former players with suffering from dementia has been sometimes okay, but in more often than not has been appalling. And the examples of it are so widespread. There's so many interesting power imbalances within English football because it's come from such a kind of unique set of circumstances, and all these different bodies have sprung up out of different communities and for different reasons at different times in English football history. We better move on. Christopher Nusis, who's been a patron since January 2021. Thank you, Christopher, for your support of well over 2.5 years. Says, after the flip-floppy start to the season, I'm still feeling very patient with the team this year. It might have something to do with my little involvement with social media and avoiding unnecessary noise. I can see the roots of what Ten Hag is trying to do. I'm confident it will come good. fine margins played the part against Arsenal, and on another day we come away with a 2-1 win. So the question is, how long will your patience last? And then there's another one on social media, but we'll come on to that in a second. After a week off, I have to say, feeling better about United's team, as we've said, but kind of with the feeling of being gutted and dismay. But without that this weekend, the underlying factors look good. We've been plagued by unfortunate injuries. So in terms of patience, I've got a lot of it at the moment. And that doesn't mean it doesn't mean I'm confident for the next few weeks that United will win lots of games, but there's plenty of patience there, yeah.
I think, to be honest, I don't know how you can't have patience, given all of the things that have happened that have been completely out of Erik Ten Hag's control, that have made the start to this season just incredibly difficult. And it was something that we mentioned after the Arsenal game. Actually, in some ways, having 6 points out of 12 from the 4 games that we've played, it could be a hell of a lot worse, given the circumstances, even given the way that we've played. There are obviously signs in the way that we've played in those 4 games that are concerning, but there are also signs, especially in the Arsenal game, that gave you a little bit of hope that things will kind of turn themselves around. I have plenty of patience. Would it shock me if United went on a really bad run after the international break? No, not really. I think that's completely possible. But as you said, patience is very different to confidence, and I certainly have a lot of patience for Ten Hag, given everything that he's having to deal with at the moment. Yeah,
Christopher's other question is, what's your relationship with the socials? He says it's so easy to get caught up in the noise and echo chambers. Do you feel that social media adds value to your enjoyment of the game, or do you think it can sometimes ruin it? It's tricky, isn't it? Because there's so much stuff that I find. I mean, for starters, me and you met on social media, and a lot of, in fact, the mates I go to with United now, I met through this podcast and social media. And I'll travel with them in Europe, and the people I know at games, some of them I met at the ground and just happened to talk to. Some of them I met through Selling United We Stand, the fanzine, but a lot of them met online. So in that sense, it's such an incredible thing as it is outside of football, but it has the same problems. And I also get to discover stories which some at their kind of worst are really funny and just a bit of light-hearted entertainment to make my day better and make me smile. And there's stories that I want to know about as well that I don't think I'd find out about through mainstream media. On the other hand, yes, it can be absolutely terrible, and it drags you down into this pit of despair to do with your team. And then when you step back, you think, what's all that about? And sometimes I'll come out of a game, or I'll go to a United game at Old Trafford or away from home, and I obviously won't have been on Twitter or Instagram or whatever during the game. I probably won't go on it after either, because I'll be having a drink at the pub with my mates. The next day, when I start making notes and preparing for this podcast, I'll have Twitter up and I'll be seeing other people's opinions and thinking, really, is that the game you saw? How do you feel that angry after that? It was just a game of fine margins. But that's the nature of Twitter. It's pub talk that should kind of be left in the day, in the hours after a game, instead of things that should be there forever. So perhaps it's something where I need to look at it as it's just pub talk, forget about it.
I think first and foremost, I definitely would not be able to be as knowledgeable about the Man United and football in general, I guess, without social media. I think it has made just keeping up with information so much easier, to a point where I think it is at a level that probably we've never seen before. You're able to understand just a lot of things that are going on at your club. Now, that also comes with downsides, because it means sometimes you can't escape it. And, there are stories all the time, and passing through which of those stories are completely legitimate, which of them might have been put there for different reasons, is challenging, as we've spoken about at length at various times. But I think in that sense, it has brought kind of information much closer, which is a well-known thing about social media in all aspects, not just with football. As always, with football United
reflects the wider world.
Exactly. I think the downside of it is also quite obvious, like you said, in just getting sucked in too much about any one individual game or individual player. I think for me, the big thing, I use social media quite a lot just to keep up with football, and, during United games, given that I don't live in the UK anymore, it is a way for me, I think, to stay more connected to other fans of Man United. it's obviously still a small sample of people, but it still is a way, I think, for me to keep up that connection to other fans. I think the big thing is just you've got to know what it's there for and understand, like you were saying, that it is basically just pub talk, and people are going to overreact after games, and I overreact after games, as I'm sure we all do at various times. Like, I'm sure you coming out of the Emirates on Saturday, last Sunday, weren't as relaxed about the situation as you are now. It's just that you were venting that in person to, mates you're at the game with, and other people that aren't at the game do that on social media. It's just, as long as you know that that's what it's for, I think you've kind of realised that it's a place for us all to kind of vent, and then the next day you come back and you're like, all right, it probably wasn't that bad or wasn't that good.
Yeah, it's just as we say, it's not a football exclusive thing, but it's the fact that those opinions which you used to just share with your mates in the pub, in a small circle, maybe a couple of other people who you don't know that well in the pub, but you were chatting with, are now there permanently, or not even permanently, but are now there 12 hours later the next morning when you've recovered, but then someone will reply to it thinking it, because they think it. That's the tricky thing with it. The way I've used it has changed massively, because when I was younger and I was living in London where I grew up and wasn't able to go every week, that was talking about the game on Twitter was such a key part of my matchday experience. And I would imagine that's still the same for you and pretty much every fan who watches United not from the ground, because it's brilliant. Even if you're watching with two mates in the pub, it's still good. Like it's still nice to go online and see what everyone else is saying about it and being in a bigger community. But now I go to games, I use Twitter a lot less. I use it, to be honest, I probably wouldn't use it if I didn't feel I had to for work anymore. Or I might use it, but even less than I do now. But it's quite an indispensable thing for football journalists. Not just, I don't share my work that much on it anymore. I am in the last few weeks and will be in the next few weeks because of the book I've got that's coming out. But for the last year or two, I haven't really shared much of the stuff I've done on it because I don't feel as much need to anymore. But to keep up with the news and see people's opinions and see United fans' opinions outside of match day, it is really important. But yeah, you change the way you use it. If you're not enjoying it, try to use it a bit less. Your life might get better, I think. Anything else before we have a tiny break and then go into the next part of questions, Jack?
No, not from me.
Cool. All right. We'll be back after this break.
NFL Sunday Ticket is now on YouTube and YouTube TV, which means that you can stay close to your team even if you don't live in their town. Like, maybe you're a Raven who married a Seahawk who got a job in the land of the Falcons. With NFL Sunday Ticket, you can watch your team's out-of-market Sunday afternoon games no matter where you live, because you shouldn't have to change teams even if you change towns. NFL Sunday Ticket, now on YouTube and YouTube TV. Go to youtube.com/presale to get $50 off.
Terms and embargoes apply. Offer ends 9/19. No refund. Subscription auto renews.
Okay, we've got some nice questions from Michael Byatts here, who was one of our very first patrons, signed up in September 2020, 3 years ago. He says, can you offer a little reminiscence? And yes, of course we can. Michael asks, first of all, he's got quite a few questions and we'll run through them. First of all, he says, how did you become a United fan? So, Jack, do you want to take this one first?
Sure. To be honest, there wasn't ever really a specific date or time when I would say I went from being not a United fan to a United fan. One side of my family are from Blakely in Manchester, were there for generations and then moved down to London eventually, which is where I was born and lived until I went off to university. So for me, it was, and all of my family that are from Blakely have been United fans also for generations. And so it was never really something that I specifically chose. It was just in my family. And, I would probably say I would have said I was a United fan probably from when I was like 3 or 4 years old. And that's never really changed. So for me, it was all about family connection. There was never a specific time where I feel like I became a United fan. It was just sort of through osmosis, I guess. And then it was just once I was old enough to talk and understand a little bit about what I was watching on TV or kicking around the house in a football, I would have said I was a United fan.
Yeah. I am, same for me for family reasons. So I was born in UCH Hospital, but the first house I grew up on is now it's a stone's throw from the Emirates Stadium. And we moved house when Arsenal built the stadium, so we wouldn't be right next to it. And the house I'm currently recording in, my parents' house, where I'm looking after my dog for a few days while they're away in North London, is a 6-minute walk from the Emirates. So the recent away day was very useful. And when Arsenal fans come to Old Trafford and sing "You Only Live Round the Corner," or sing that at United's away fans, it's very accurate in my case. But mine was also family. So it came down from my dad. He became a United fan, slightly different from yours, and probably from most people's, in that his dad wasn't a big football fan. Neither was his mum. He grew up in Cheshire, near Macclesfield, in a little town called Prestbury, which has always been pretty middle class, but grown ever more so as footballers began to move in down the road about 10, 15 years ago. My grandma still lives there, so I go see her. And the local postman, when my dad grew up, was a man called Stan Pearson, who won the 1948 FA Cup with Man United, was an incredible player, came through at United. He played for the Adelphi Lads Club in Salford. He's mentioned a fair bit in the book I've written, which is quite a nice circle because of what you're about to hear, which was he was a local postman. My dad did the paper round for him. Stan used to get out his England caps and show them to my dad. And so that was kind of the first United connection. And then my dad's, I think he went a couple of times when he was like 8, 9, 10 to Old Trafford, but not much because his dad wasn't into it. But then he started doing glass collecting at the local pub, and one of the older employees there was a massive United fan, home and away, and started taking him to Old Trafford every week. And then he offered my older brother the chance to be United or Arsenal. I don't know how genuine the offer to be an Arsenal fan was, but I think he felt we were going to grow up round the corner. I wonder what would have happened if he had said, I want to be an Arsenal fan. But anyway, I think he thought, you're going to grow up round the corner. If you want to be an Arsenal fan like all your mates and grow up with them and all of that, then fair enough, which is different to most dads, I think. But it came from a good place. Anyway, my brother chose United after Arsenal beat United 1-0, and he got kind of taken the piss out of in the playground. And he thought, well, if they're going to take the piss out of me, then I'm definitely going to be a United fan. And I didn't really have a choice, similar to you, osmosis from that point. I never had the United Arsenal choice. It kind of just followed. And I've worked out recently, I don't know if it's a COVID thing. A lot of people are saying that COVID's like not having COVID, but that time of being in lockdown has kind of messed with it. My memory's terrible at the moment. I can barely remember like large parts of my childhood, which is weird. So I don't kind of know what my first United memory is, which is the next question from Michael. What's your first memory of United? I don't know. I can't. I know what my first game was, and we'll come on to that. But do you remember your first memory of United? I obviously remember Moscow 2008. I remember Solskjaer's testimonial very vividly. I don't remember watching Keane play. So I know it came between Keane leaving and United winning the Champions League. But I remember games in there. My first game came before then. So I don't know what it is. Do you remember yours? First memory?
So I don't remember my first like specific United memory. One thing that I do remember very clearly was that I had the United, I think 2001, 2002, like season review on DVD. And it was when we were in the Vodafone kit. Van Nistelrooy was playing. We were playing Deportivo in the. I actually just looked it up to try and find out the season, but I've realised we actually played Deportivo. 2 seasons in a row. So I'm not actually. It could be. Do you remember if we? I don't think we won the league in either of those seasons, did we? Because I know this DVD we didn't win the league in the season that this was. So it's either 01-02 or 02-03.
02-03 we won the league. 01-02 we didn't win the league.
So it must have been 01-02 then. But for me, it was that season because I remember just watching it. I must have watched it about 7 or 8 times over the course of like a year or so. Van
Nistelrooy, I assume, was the main.
Van Nistelrooy. He was absolutely the main character. And for me, I grew up.
Solskjaer hit 25 goals that season.
Wow. I wonder if he was starting all the time alongside Van Nistelrooy.
30 starts, 17 off the bench. He probably scored all of his goals off the bench anyway. Van Nistelrooy, 36 goals. Yeah. Not Ruud's best season, but it's not bad.
And I think
Beckham, 16.
I think that was the season we came back from 3-0 down at Spurs as well at White Hart Lane. I think it was that year.
That sounds correct, yeah.
And
2001,
that is probably like I said, it's not really a specific thing. And it was obviously it would have been at least the following season after that if I had the DVD. But for me, like I said, despite my family all being from Blakely, going back a few generations, grew up in London, and the place I grew up was Chingford, which is where David Beckham is from, and Harry Kane is from as well. I went to the same primary school as David Beckham. And so for me, growing up at that time, watching David Beckham play for my team, having grown up where I grew up, he was my absolute hero, and probably still is to this day, to be honest. So he, for me, was like a really big part of my United sort of fandom when I was that young. And some of my earliest memories really just involve sort of idolising him as a really young kid.
Yeah, nice. Michael gives us the reason he became a United fan. He says, Brian Robson recovering from injury to captain England at the 1986 World Cup. He was my first favourite player. I was 8, turning 9. And because he was the captain of United, I became a United fan. Yeah. I always find interesting, there's a lovely list of individuals who have made many people United fans going, Meredith, Best. Probably Law as well, but Meredith, Best, Robson, maybe Whiteside. Probably Whiteside, because in Northern Ireland, and then Cantona, Keane, Rooney, Ronaldo, maybe Rashford recently has probably insured some United fans. Yeah. First game at Old Trafford. Mine was United 7, Roma 1.
That is some first game to go to. In
the Stretford End. And I didn't go back to the Stretford End. I was writing about this for United recently, because when the announcement that the executive area was being taken out of the Stretford End, which will happen next summer, and there was this whole thing about the heart of the support being returned to the supporters, which is great. And they said, can you write like a few words on the Stretford End? And I was remembering that my first ever game was in the Stretford End, United 7, Roma 1. I was lofted up as like this mascot by some man who was so pissed, and he didn't come back after half time. So presumably he found his correct seat or was taken out. Who knows? And then I didn't get a ticket in the Stretford End for years after that. Years. And I sat in East Stand for ages and ages, and occasionally in one of the side stands, but mainly in East Stand upper. And then eventually got back in the Stretford End, and now a season ticket holder there. And that is very satisfying. But yeah, some first game. It's pretty amazing. I don't think I'll ever get a better game at Old Trafford.
No, I don't think you will. And then you had the privilege of chatting to Clive Tilsley as well on the podcast during COVID about that 7-1 game. Yeah.
I told him, he found it very depressing.
What a reminder of his age.
From an age point of view. Yeah, I think so. What was your first game?
So my first game was United 2, Southampton 1 at Old Trafford in 2002. It was November 2002. It was right around my birthday. We would try, whenever we'd visit the family that we had in Blakely, to always try and match it up with a United game as well. And so that was my first game. Diogo Forlan scored a screamer to win it in the 85th minute or something around that time. Nice. I was sitting also in the Stretford End, managed to somehow get tickets in the Stretford End. Yeah, it was great. I think Phil Neville scored as well. So two sort of goal scorers that not that many people probably score for United. That was a great game.
I had Alan Smith and Patrice Evra scoring in mine.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, and we're also collector's item. So November 2002. You were born 97.
Yeah,
right?
so I was. Yes, it was the day before my birthday, so I was just turning 5. It was my first game.
That's an early one. I think I was 6. Yeah, April 2007 would have been 6. Yeah, because I'm an August baby. Yeah, I see sometimes people taking them at like 2 or 3. It's mad.
Yeah, and I always wonder how children that small do at games. And also like if parents really able to enjoy it that much when you're having to that actively look after a little kid.
There was someone at Blackburn became a season ticket holder, I think, within 3 hours of their birth recently. I think it was obviously like a deliberate kind of gimmick. But yeah, this kid was born and their dad rang up straight after and was like, can I have a season ticket? So presumably he's the youngest season ticket holder in football history. But who knows? I actually bet there's some South American who's kind of presented a season ticket out of the womb and straight at them. But yeah.
Or someone somewhere like gave birth at a stadium or something and got a season ticket immediately.
Yeah, maybe. Michael says, what's your favourite United moment? Do you have one straight away? If so, God. Go ahead. Oh, no. So you don't. There's so many. I mean, Moscow 2008 has this incredible child kind of, it's covered in this kind of nostalgic childlike cloud. The memories of it aren't that clear because I was 7. So that's obviously up there. And it was that thing where, like, in the playground where people would say, what's the best day of your life? And I'd say United winning the Champions League. And it probably was. It was brilliant. I got to stay up late and then watch United win the Champions League and on penalties, and everyone was there. And like my mum and dad's United mates were there. And we went to an Italian restaurant down the road on Blackstock Road, if anyone knows North London very well. And then we didn't go to the restaurant in 2009, and we were convinced that's why we lost. And then we went again in 2011, back to it, thinking, right, we'll win this time. And obviously, we still lost. So, but yeah, 2008, in terms of in the stands, which are probably better, the 2-0 McTominay City one, as so many people say, will always just be so good because of what followed and what we knew at the time, and the game itself. It was incredible. The weekend around United beating City, the only time I've done City away as a fan rather than a reporter, 2019 when Martial and Rashford scored to win 2-1, December 2019. And that whole weekend was pretty special because it was me, my brother, my dad at City away. It was obviously amazing. We then went to the Christmas markets in Manchester after, and they were just shutting down, but had a couple of beers there. And then I think would it have been a Sunday? Anyway, I can't remember. We then went for a really like late night Chinese at a great place in town and had the Tyson Fury fight on our phones propped up as well. And that whole week, and the day before, all my schoolmates had come up from wherever they were living to visit me and my mate whose birthday it was at uni. And we went out for a massive night. So that whole weekend is probably my favourite United-based weekend.
Yeah, that's a serious weekend, that. The McTominay one too, like, I can't imagine, it was difficult for everyone to deal with not having football, obviously, in the middle of COVID and everything. I can't imagine what that come down must have been like from being in the ground watching that McTominay goal go in and then 5 days later be in lockdown.
Yeah. It was also a Sunday, so it was harder to go out and properly set, like, because I was in my first year of uni. And so if that had been a Saturday, I would have just been able to message around and go, right, everyone out. But it was a Sunday. A couple of people had already gone home because of COVID. There weren't that many people around. I remember ringing my girlfriend and saying, I need someone to go out with. And I didn't have as many match-going mates at United then. So it wasn't a case that I could go with them. And I remember ringing my girlfriend and going, right, we need to go and do something. And we ended up getting a couple of beers and a gyros at a place in Fallowfield. But I had to do something. I was on such a massive, massive buzz. I just needed something.
Weirdly, I also have a
game. So the Liverpool game at the start of last season.
Yeah.
Out of the blue, and then we celebrate. That was a Monday night, but this time I was with United mates, and we went out for many, many beers. Yeah,
I mean that was a proper like backs to the wall kind of game as well. Yeah.
Your favourite?
I think for me, so frustratingly, all of the big games that I've been to, either at Old Trafford or elsewhere watching United, we've lost. So I was at the 50th anniversary of the Munich air disaster in 2008, which was an amazing occasion, but we ended up losing 2-1. I was
watching that at my blue cousin's house in Cheshire.
But that was fun.
And I also watched the 6-1 with them.
I think maybe you just shouldn't watch matches with them anymore.
No, I haven't. We actually haven't since the 6-1. We've refused.
Probably for the best. Then I was at the first FA Cup final at the New Wembley in 2007, which we lost. And I was at the end where Drogba scored and he poked it past Van der Sar. And then actually the most recent game that I've been to at Old Trafford, because I haven't been able to get back since I moved here, it was Liverpool in the Europa League, in 2016 when Coutinho scored that chip at the near post over De Gea. So my record I've seen United win at Old Trafford a few times, but because the games sort of weren't big enough, it doesn't really feel like what I would consider my best moment, really. Yeah. One that always sticks out is actually the Arsenal semi-final in the Champions League in 2008. Yeah. That partially because, like, you growing up in London, like a lot of the people I went to school with were either Arsenal or Spurs fans. And so that was particularly sweet, I think, being able to go in to school the next day and properly be able to like gloat it was also at an age where like I just started sort of being allowed to like stay up for those late Champions League games all the time. And it just felt particularly sweet, that one for me. So that is definitely up there.
I was bitter about that game because my brother and my dad were there and I didn't get to go. And I was...
Oh, wow.
I don't know whether I would have been... I'm probably in bed with like the wind-up radio listening to it on that.
The other one that sticks out more recently is when the first game of the season in 2019, 2020, when we beat Chelsea 4-1 or 4-0. That just was a great game, but personally I was in Boston for the summer at the time and was at the like United pub in Boston. I met
nice
a few people that listen to the podcast that I still chat to occasionally, like Kevin, and that was a great day. It was great for me, like after a few years of not really being in sort of that like really visceral like fan supporting like atmosphere, to be back there after, you know, first game of the season when it, you know, we didn't actually play that well in the first like 20 or 30 minutes, and then to really see everyone like come alive was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's cool. Knowing the amount of Irish in Boston, I can imagine there's a fairly big United supporting community there.
Yeah, there was a good few hundred people in the pub that day. It was a great turnout.
Nice. I've been to the US a couple of times, but not since I was 14 was the last time. I'd love to, when I next go, I'd love to watch a game with a proper like group of US Reds. It'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, if you look up, you're dead right about the Irish connection too. Like if you look up in most major cities where like the sort of United pub is always an Irish pub.
Yeah, absolutely. The other memory that I probably hold, there's two others that I hold close, which is chatting with Sir Alex, and the first time I covered a game in the press box at Old Trafford was United 3, Southampton 2 under Solskjaer. The game with a series of brilliant goals. Ward-Prowse scored one.
Yeah.
I think
that Pereira's goal too.
Yeah, I think Livramento was that too? That must be too early for Livramento. It must have been another. Oh, Jan Valery, I think. It was another young Southampton fullback. Yeah, and Pereira as well. And United won 3-2. And it was a culmination of many years hard work and getting to be in there. And then for that game, for it to be such a classic United game, just a ridiculous comeback and all this noise, and being able to sit in the press box and you get to look around. Like, I love being in the mayhem and I love it more, which is why I now go to games as a fan wherever possible instead of working them. But being able to sit there and look around with the Stretford end on your left, East End on your right, the away fans on your right as well, and see just so many bodies leaping around is just such an amazing sight, and is why I love football. But we better move on. We could go on like this for hours and hours, but we need to move on because Michael's final question is a big one as well. Can you pick an all-time 11? Now I'm going to start, and the first one I'm going to do is of players that I've seen, and I wrote it down before we started, but it took me surprisingly little time to do, and see what you think. Mine would be prime David De Gea, Neville, Ferdinand, Vidic, Evra, Scholes, Carrick, Fernandes, Rooney, Ronaldo, Tevez. Now, Giggs would be in there if it went to a traditional 4-4-2, but I've gone for a more modern 4-2-3-1. What do you... I think everything seems fairly obvious in what I've seen. Yours will be slightly different because you've got Rude and Keane are probably the two big additions. Would I be correct in that?
The only other person for if we're going sort of that, I guess say from like 2006 sort of onwards, would be, you've got one like short-lived amazing striker in there in Tevez. Did Van Persie ever come into consideration?
Well, I'm partly thinking for the combination of players slightly.
Yeah.
To have fair. Rooney, Ronaldo, Tevez as your three, it was perfection. And I wouldn't want to mess with that.
Yeah, I mean, great team. I think my back five would be exactly the same. Van der Sar is probably the hardest one to leave out for me.
Yeah, I think same. Well, Van der Sar and Giggs are the two that are really hard to leave out.
Yeah. Then, definitely have
because I've gone for midfield 2 rather than a 3, I think it has to be Scholes over Giggs or Carrick over Giggs for the sake of that.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I mean, also in the years that you're including there, like, you know, Giggs wasn't in his absolute prime. He was still a very, very good player at that point, but his best years were sort of behind him. Okay, so yours is De Gea, Neville, Ferdinand, Vidic, Evra, and then pick it up from there. Definitely Scholes in midfield. I'm trying to decide on a formation kind of on the fly. Yeah, Keane would definitely be in there.
Rude.
Then maybe I'd put Bruno Fernandes as well. Then Van Nistelrooy would definitely be the striker. Ronaldo would have to be in there. Rooney would have to be in there, which gets me to 11. But
surely take Fernandes out.
I'd want to get Beckham in.
Yeah. So you could have a midfield of...
Maybe I play 2 up front with Rooney and Van Nistelrooy, Ronaldo on the left, Scholes and Keane in midfield, and Beckham on the right.
Yeah, that sounds the correct decision to me. I also wrote down, and this isn't definitive and won't ever be my definitive answer because it's just impossible to do, but off the top of my head, my best ever 11, including those I didn't see, but from watching and reading, would be Schmeichel, Neville, Ferdinand, Stam, Irwin, Keane, Edwards, Charlton, Cantona, Ronaldo, Law. And that is straight off the top of my head. Stam maybe shouldn't be in there. Maybe Roger Byrne over Neville. But even that leaves out Robson, Giggs and Best and Van Nistelrooy. And if you're mentioning Ruud, and Rooney. And if you're mentioning Ruud, then you have to mention Tommy Taylor because he was equally good, if not better in his era. And Rooney and Beckham. And then what about Charlie Roberts and Billy Meredith or Frank Barson? The whole thing is ridiculous. It's just impossible to do. But that was straight off the top of my head, 5 minutes before recording. That's what I wrote down.
I don't think it's possible to make any truly all-time United 11 without feeling horrendous about some of the players that you're leaving out.
No. Also, it's ridiculous. I didn't watch Duncan Edwards play, but he's obviously going to be in there.
Yeah,
I didn't watch Keane play week in, week out. I didn't watch Charlton play, but they have to be in there. Right, let's move on. Michael Lisi, who has been another one, like Michael Byers, the two Michaels, both been patrons since September 2020, both some of the first to sign up, who says, as an American-based fan, is there anything we can do to further support the Glazers Out campaign? I can't think of anything. Jack, anything?
I mean, the only thing really is just to be active about it on social media if you use it, because I think we've seen that the club do respond to their image in the public sphere. I'm not saying that an additional 2 or 3 tweets is going to move the needle, but I think just being part of applying pressure in any way that we can, not being, at the ground. And I think that is really the only way that you can.
Yeah. Yeah. He says, are there any non-United players that you try to follow? I'm tempted to try and watch more, or any really, Real Madrid games because of Jude Bellingham and Inter Miami for Messi, but it's hard to motivate when it's not United. I'll let you go first because then I'm going to wax some lyrical about Jude Bellingham because I absolutely love him.
Yeah, it's a great question. Bellingham, I'll let you do more of the talking on him, but yeah, I mean, his story and what he's doing at Real Madrid is incredible. I think I'm always intrigued when I see English players, especially young English players, go abroad, just because it's a relatively recent, not that it hasn't happened before, but it didn't really happen for a good sort of 10, 15 years and has now started happening a little bit more. So that always intrigues me. I'm definitely more attuned to what's happening in the MLS than I have been at any time before. Now living in Chicago, we managed to go to some Chicago Fire games, and Messi coming to Inter Miami has definitely made that a little bit stronger. It's funny, since I was probably 4 or 5 years old, I've never really followed individual players. Even at United, I don't feel like I feel like great affinity to any single players.
No, like when Ronaldo left, I didn't have any interest in following Ronaldo and Real Madrid at all.
Yeah.
It just made me love Rooney more.
No one else really that I'm like, I really want to watch. And there are definitely players that, like, if there's a big Champions League game on, I will specifically try and watch them.
Love to see watching.
Yeah, but I don't go out of my way to follow their career.
Yeah. If I find myself, say 5 years ago, if I found myself at loose end and I wanted to watch a game, but I didn't know who was playing, or I saw that Barcelona were playing, I would make an effort to watch Barca so I could see Messi as his career was coming to a close. And it was worth doing because Messi's unbelievable. At the moment, and it is interesting that Michael mentions Bellingham because he's the first player I felt motivated to watch another team apart from United for one of the only ever where I thought, I need to watch Real Madrid this season because he's just incredible. The story, absolutely, like a boy from Stourbridge signing for Real Madrid for 100 million at 19 is ridiculous. And the fact that he's breaking records already, 5 goals in his first 4 games and all of this, it's mad. And the fact he's got Zidane's number 5 on the back and his iconic number, and he's already established this iconic celebration, which is the perfect mixture of confidence and arrogance. It treads the line so perfectly. When he celebrated against Getafe the other day, it was this, he taps in for a 95th minute when it's 5th goal in 4 games and he runs towards a corner, does the most perfectly like effortless knee slide, then gets up and his teammates come around and once they've left, just stands with his arms out to the newly rebuilt Bernabeu. It's just perfection. He's such a fun player to watch. The fact he can play at kind of any level of the pitch, but also the story and the fact he's bought into the romance of it all and he's not kind of hid away from it. He's saying, this is a dream to play for Real Madrid, but also with the mixture of this is where I should be. I'm good enough to be here. And the fact he mentioned Sid Lowe in his first press conference when Sid asked the question and said, I'm a big fan, by the way. I just love the fact when there's so many players moving to Saudi Arabia and everything, and also that so many young footballers who I still think are great, but they feel quite different to me as a football fan. Bellingham as a football player, obviously very different, but as a fan, he seems fairly similar to us in that he watched like Revista de la Liga when he was growing up, and he's clearly just a massive football fan, not just a fan of FIFA, but of football and watch the same stuff that we did growing up. And for him to now be at Real Madrid, it's amazing. He's only 20 and he's so good to watch. So yeah, that is who I'll be watching. I
love the ownership that Bellingham has sort of taken over his career too. He's always chosen maybe not the most obvious path. And I love that he seems to, like you said, he seems to understand like the romance in football, and his career is definitely a great example of the romance that does still exist in the game. Just a quick one on him, like as a player as well. What I find so fascinating about him is that I don't think I could really sit here and say to you, this is Bellingham's sort of super strength. No. As a so player, complete. He's so well-rounded at such a young age. And when I went and had the privilege of watching him at Dortmund last year, I mean, I don't think it was already very highly rated Bellingham. Of course, how could you not? But watching him in person, I mean, he looked. It looked like a player playing down 2 or 3 ages in like junior football. Honestly, he was just so head and shoulders above everyone else on the pitch. Yeah, it was a joke. Yeah,
it's the fact he's, especially now over the last year, 18 months, the fact his physique has grown as well, and he's now such a commanding presence, but with that deftness of touch, and that he's as all great players should, and even good players should, but the great players do to an even greater extent. The ability to see and decide what's going to happen so far in advance of it happening. And when he receives a ball and there'll be 2 players and he'll just touch it with both feet and go through the middle of them. And the confidence to do that on the world stage for Real is amazing. He just is complete. Like Carlo Ancelotti at the moment, his midfield options are pretty good in Camavinga and Tchouameni, so and Modric still as well. So he can play. He doesn't need to play Bellingham midfield, so he puts him further up, and he turns out that he's a really good striker as well, because he's got that hunger and the desire to get in for those tap-ins, even as a midfielder. Yeah, and because he's so decisive, because he knows what's going to happen, and he's so decisive. That first half a second, or even less, when he receives the ball, there's just no doubt in it at all, and he's got long enough legs that he can kind of break away from someone very quickly as well. So the combination of that brilliance in decision making and awareness of what's going on, and now the physique where he can burst away from someone, I can't imagine defending against it. And I would love him at United, and I always would have done, but seeing him play for Real is pretty great as well. And hopefully he comes to United at some point in his career. We probably would have figured out a way to ruin his career as well. That's the unspoken truth. Michael Lisi's final question is, who are the players that you have most connection to? For me, if Rashford ever left the club, I'd be beyond gutted. Of course, there are others like Bruno, Martinez, Shaw and Garnacho now, but Rashford feels like the soul to me. Are there any others at the top of your lists? I think Rashford for me, yeah. I think anyone else could leave and I'd get over it. I'd be gutted if Bruno left and if Martinez left at this point, and Garnacho as well. But Rashford, yeah, you're right. There's a sense that he feels like the meaning of Man United. Yeah, Rashford and Shaw for me, definitely. And Rashford a pretty long way ahead of Shaw as well. Yeah. It's not to say that United should keep Rashford if he's not playing well enough, but it'd be really gutting. Yeah. So agreed with you on that one, Michael. Now, final one before we have a very short preview of the Brighton game that's coming up this weekend. Another Saturday, 3 p.m. kickoff. Another one. Don Wilson, who's been a patron for 2.5 years now, since February 2021, says, does Jack feel like any less of a United supporter now he's living in the US? I've been following this team since the early 80s, but struggle to get content. Now that I have what I'd say is too much content, I wonder how match-going fans view the rest of us. It seems to be somewhat hostile towards non-UK supporters. I'm sure your podcast reaches everywhere. How do the rest of us stack up versus the Manx? Well, in terms of listenership, most of our listeners are from the US. I think that's purely a larger population point of view. I think Manchester's the biggest. I think London's the biggest in the UK, and then Manchester, again, population point of view. But it's a pretty big split between England and the rest of the world. A lot from Ireland, quite a few from Nigeria, I think. We've reached a silly amount of countries. It's lovely looking at the map and seeing where people have been listening from. But yeah, a lot from Scandinavia, a lot from the UK and Ireland, a lot from the US, and then a few Nigeria and Ghana and Kenya and a few African countries as well. But Jack, do you want to take on the point about how your kind of United fandom changes after you've left the country?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's a little strange anyway, because I would never have considered myself like a local fan just because I've never lived in Manchester. And so to that degree, I think the way that potential Mancunians who have been, going to Old Trafford every week for, 20, 30 years would probably view me, some people would probably view me not authentic in some way anyway, I guess. I think since moving, I don't feel any less of a United supporter, because ultimately, to me, whether you're less or more of a supporter is more just about your dedication to it. And I probably watch more United than I ever have now, and have since I came to the US. And if anything, I've had to put more effort into doing that because it's on at different times.
Yeah.
But I think the big change for me is I definitely do feel less like connected to the United fan base and just what the general like feelings are among the fan base, I guess. Like,
right.
Even growing up in London, you're just surrounded by a lot of other United fans. And even though they obviously don't speak for everyone, you get sort of a sense of what the pervading just like thoughts and feelings are about the team or issues about the club. And I think that for me is a part of it that is difficult to replicate. That's why I mentioned earlier, that's why social media has played that role for me. And I probably use it more than the average person, partially to stay connected to the fan base, because it isn't that easy to recreate that. And, it's hard just not being surrounded by United fans all the time. I work with a couple of people that are very into football, but they're unfortunately both Arsenal fans. So there isn't too much for me to chat about. That's why I love doing this podcast as well, because, through chatting to you, Harry, hearing about your experiences at Old Trafford and also just what sort of general feeling from the fan base is about the club is lovely for me to stay that bit more connected. So I personally, I've never, and this is obviously partially my bias because I've never lived in the same town as the club I support. I've never subscribed to the theory of, fans of any less or less authentic because they are,
I don't think any
supporting their local team necessarily. But I think it is a different experience being a fan, not being in the same town.
Yeah, I think not recognising that would be silly. But I think generally when local United fans are hostile towards non-local fans, it's normally a representation of them just being pissed off at something else and someone easy to take it out on. But they are different experiences. And I think what angers both sections of that support is when people, but particularly when the club kind of don't recognise that there is a difference, and running away from that's silly. And I do think that Manchester United should be there primarily to serve the Manchester community from which it was founded. But that doesn't mean neglecting everything else, because the global fan base is such a key part of United and has been since the 50s and is as much a part of United as the local community. But I think Manchester United should be there, or not maybe primarily, but certainly a key focus of United should be to serve the Manchester community as a football club, but also as a kind of proud institution in the area it is. And when United have been at their best, they've done that. Too often recently, they haven't done that. But yeah, I find when I watch matches with non-United fans, and I found this a lot during lockdown, some of the lockdown I was at home, so I was with my family who are Reds, but when I was at lockdown at uni and I was with a mixture of Arsenal fans, a City fan and a Southampton fan and a couple of others. Yeah, it's annoying. And then you do turn to social media because that's where it's good. And yeah, being a United fan is something that kind of unites you with someone else. It's such a shared interest that really does define you. So yeah, it's strange. But yeah, I think match-going fans what match-going fans get pissed off at is when it feels as if they're ignored in favour of the global United support. And that's more of a Premier League-wide problem then. And that's not the fault of the global support. That's the fault of the club and the Premier League.
I feel like the one that I always remember like that was the Pogba transfer announcement happening at like just gone midnight in the UK. And like stuff like that is just, your predominant fan base is around the area where the club is, that they should be the focus. And, it would be much more convenient for me if all United's games were at 7 or 8 p.m. in the US, but that isn't how it is and how it should be. And I think it is just one of those things where, being a fan overseas, it is more challenging to make things work, but that is just the way it is.
Yeah.
And I don't think the club
There's different sacrifices, isn't there?
Yeah,
for match-going fans, it's a financial and time thing. And for global fans, it's mainly a time thing. And if they're going to come to a game, then it becomes a huge financial commitment. And the fact that at Old Trafford every week there are kind of 5, 10, maybe 15,000 supporters who have come from far places across the globe, from the US and India and Australia, it's incredible. And people who have saved up for years to try and do that trip. That's the kind of stuff that should be celebrated, and the communities it creates in these different countries across the world should be celebrated. And I think the club have got better at doing that recently. But that should be done while you also celebrate the communities, the original communities in Manchester.
Yeah,
it's bringing those things closer together. Yeah. The final thing from Don, he says, Harry, your United through time was brilliant. Thank you. I don't hear you mention it often. I wonder if those of us less familiar with the history would be interested in hearing it. I haven't done it for a while. I'm currently working on the next episode. United through time was a podcast they did a lot 2 years ago. There's been 7 episodes in total. It's the podcast that inspired the book I've written called The Men Who Made Manchester United, because that's what it's about. It's about the most influential figures in United history. Goes in chronological order, so it's covered the kind of key figures up to 1945. The next one is the final character in the book, James W. Gibson, who was president from 1932 up until his death in 1951. And yeah, it's about the key figures, and it's meant to be kind of like immersive documentaries. I get a few guests on, lots of sound effects. I love making them. They're so fun because they're kind of a proper kind of audio production. The first one on Louis Rocca is the most listened to one, but the one I like the least because it was the first one, so it's the worst. The most recent one on Walter Crickman from a year or two ago was really good to make, and I'm just like inspired by the characters. I love them, which is why I wrote a book about them. The next United Through Time will be out in the next month or so, primarily kind of to finish off the series of these people and to promote the book as well. But it's been fun to make getting interviews that I did about a year and a half ago and listening back to them. And they're so interesting. Like, these people are so interesting. So if you haven't listened to it,
I can't recommend it enough for anyone that hasn't listened to it, and also to buy the book, because the amount of time and research that Harry puts into all of this is pretty incredible.
It's just so, like, honestly, I think if other people had the time and were fortunate enough to have the time to be able to do this, and like being at uni helped, and the lockdowns helped a lot, because it's a lot of time just staring and trawling through old newspapers on the British Newspaper Archive, which is an amazing resource. And it helps that I'm a history nerd. I did history at uni. I'll happily nerd out on it with anyone. And it's just, I love the bit I love about football is where it intersects with social history. And so the book covers themes like trade unionism and industrialization and the railways and feminism and nationalism and stuff. It's not overly focused on that, I hope. It's mainly focused on United and the football, but where football reflects all of those things, I find so interesting. James Gibson, if you go into Old Trafford, there's a plaque for James Gibson inside the ground, but also outside on the bridge on Sir Matt Busby Way, if you ever want, on your left-hand side, a red plaque, just beyond where the second United We Stand cell will be, and just before the stewards, if you need help finding it, for James W. Gibson, and that'll be out soon.
The intersection between football and social history is, I think, a big reason why specifically the history of football in the north of England is such an interesting thing to learn more about, simply because I think the history of the north of England itself is so fascinating, and is a real story of like kind of backs against the wall, like really persevering against all odds kind of history, and that runs in a lot of the northern football clubs as well.
Yeah. And because the time span of the book is so big, so it starts, the first chapter begins with Billy Meredith's birth in 1874, and the final chapter, well, the epilogue is Munich, and the final chapter is on the 1948 FA Cup final. So it's a huge amount of time. And so I do talk about like the Manchester social history side of things and how Manchester's changing quite a lot, but it's hard to get that depth. And if I was to write it just on kind of a 10 or 15 year period, you'd be able to go into that depth of Manchester so much more. Because it's especially Manchester around that time. It's just the history of it as a city's incredible, and the characters. The funnest thing is pulling out the characters out of what could otherwise be kind of a dull industrial history. Is pulling like some of them who haven't made the book, but like I read about and researched, like the detective Caminada. There's a house, a set of flats I think named after him in Manchester. This like Sherlock Holmes-esque detective who kind of changed the whole police force in Manchester because he was actually good at his job when everyone else was shit at theirs, and he was pulling in too many people, and he operated in this kind of scientific investigation like Sherlock Holmes did. And the Sherlock novels were coming out at the same time. Yeah. And it's a similar, like at the same time, you've got Jack the Ripper in London. So there's all these things crossing over. It's fascinating. We should wrap up in a second. But Brighton, confident? I'm not. But I'm looking forward to being back. This weekend's been very boring without football.
Yeah, not especially confident. I mean, we are at home, which helps.
Very good record building at home. Well, not even building, has been building for a long time. But I guess it's got to come to an end at some point.
Well, and the last two games don't fill you with confidence that it's going to be a comfortable game. But I mean, Brighton have been themselves a little bit up and down to start the season too.
Yeah.
I think the key for United is, as it is almost any game against Brighton, is if you can figure out the midfield, then we'll be fine. But that is sort of the challenge. I mean, I'm intrigued to see how much possession we allow Brighton to have, because they are a very possession dominant team. When we've played them at the Amex under both Potter and De Zerbi, we generally allow them to have a very large share of possession.
I don't think they like having that possession that much. I think it's what we've done to try and, because the best thing that they do is hit you on the counter-attack. And it might not be kind of it's not like Brexit ball counter-attack would be the phrase that Football Twitter would use. It's not just lumping it forward as soon as you regain possession. It's a much more refined version of counter-attacking football, and they're brilliant at it. But that is where they're at their very best. And allowing them possession is a way to kind of get around that. So I think that's what we've tried in the past, but then they've still been better than us. So it will be interesting to see what Ten Hag goes with. We obviously didn't do very well against them last season.
I mean, John McKenzie does some great analysis on De Zerbi's Brighton about how they are very, very good at manipulating an opposition press to having to go to areas that they don't want to. And I think this will be a great test of how we have improved. Because that is the one thing, like you mentioned the stats a couple of episodes ago about how many ball recoveries we've had in the opposition half. I think we're still top of the league in that regard. So, we clearly have improved in our shape off the ball, but without Antony, who is pretty key to that normally, and against a team that are very good at stopping your press and being effective, it'll be a great test, I think, of where we are in that regard. And then the key battle for us, I think, will be Wan-Bissaka against Mitoma, whether we can, because he's really the danger on the counter-attack. Obviously, they've got Solly March too, but Mitoma, for me, is definitely the biggest threat.
It feels
And then I'm just excited to see Højlund.
Yeah. That's a big change. That'll be good.
I can imagine he'll get a huge reception at Old Trafford.
Yeah, he will. I was going to say it feels written for the other young striker playing, the other United supporting kid, for Evan Ferguson to score at Old Trafford.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Yeah. Anyway, it's been a wonderful episode. Lovely chance to chat about non-match things. Thank you, patrons, for your support and for your brilliant questions that guided this conversation. Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you'd like to join the Patreon community, you can do so. Patreon.com/United Weekly Podcast. All of those words in full, not UTD, the actual word United Weekly Podcast. And for more from us throughout the week, you can find Jack on Twitter at
UTD Tate, Tait.
And you can find me at Harry Robinson64 and the podcast itself at UTD Weekly Pod. Thank you for listening. Have a great week. Enjoy the game against Brighton on Saturday, wherever you are watching in the world, whether it's at Old Trafford, on your sofa, or in a bar somewhere from the US all the way to Australia. And we'll speak to you very soon. Goodbye.
Social Podcast Network.